You're 26, working the night shift at a hospital lab, running blood work panels under fluorescent light that never changes whether it's noon or 3 a.m. You're good at the job for a reason nobody in this building would guess. You grew up helping your grandmother tend the mushroom lodge behind her house, learning which species fruited in which conditions before you learned to drive. Mycology was always a hobby you kept quiet, something you did in a converted closet with a seating mat and a spray bottle. Because a hospital lab tech growing psilocybin mushrooms on the side to a kind of detail that ends a career fast in this state. The night everything changes, a coworker corners you in the break room, holding her phone like it's radioactive. Her brother's been in and out of treatment-resistant depression for 6 years. Nothing has worked, and she's read enough now to know exactly what she wants to ask you. Quietly, with the door half closed, can you debt her something? Nothing, my doctor. From Zor Closet. You should say no. You know the law. You know what a felony conviction does to a lab tech's license. You know the sensible answer is no. You said yes anyway, because you've watched what 6 years of failed treatment has done to a person you actually know. And because some part of you has wanted an excuse to stop treating your hobby like a shameful secret. You give her a small jar for free. It works better and faster than anything her brother psychiatrist has tried. Word moves through people who are suffering the way word always moves through people who are suffering. Quietly, urgently, person to person, because the official system has already failed them once. Within a month, you have more requests than your closet to supply, and you understand you've crossed a line you can't uncross. A year in, the spare room isn't enough. You rent a unit in an industrial park under a shell LLC that does nothing but exist on paper, and you build out something that would pass at a glance for a small pharmaceutical research operation. Multiple grow rooms running in parallel, humidity logs, a yield curve you track like quarterly earnings. You hire your first person, someone who knows enough to help you maintain the rooms and not enough to run the operation without you, because you've already learned the central rule of staying alive in this business. Nobody below you should ever know more than their piece. You stop just growing and start processing, drying, weighing, standardizing potency so the people buying from you know exactly what they're getting, batch to batch, the way a real pharmaceutical company would guarantee dosage consistency. You tell yourself this is the responsible way to do it, but you preventing the exact kind of unpredictable, badly dosed product that gets people hurt on the street. You're not entirely wrong. You're also, by any legal definition, running a drug manufacturing operation with an org chart. By year 3, you've stopped selling retail entirely. You coordinate 3 satellite grow sites you rarely visit in person, so a single raid can't take down the whole supply. Product moves through a layered chain of people who've never met you and don't know your name, only a first name that isn't yours. You've learned a revenue through a wellness consulting business that does just enough real invoicing to survive a cursory audit. You've read enough about how actual cartels compartmentalize their operations to know you're building a small, deliberate copy of that structure. And some nights that recognition unsettles you more than anything else about the work. The money stops being the point somewhere around here, which is its own kind of warning sign. What keeps you going is the stack of messages you save on a burner phone. Parents whose kids stop having night terrors. Veterans who stop drinking. The coworker's brother, 3 years clean of the depression but nearly killed him twice, still texting you updates you never asked for. You've built a criminal operation, and you've also built, without planning to, one of the more effective mental health interventions available to the people who message you, none of whom can get the same treatment through any legal channel in your state. That contradiction is what makes you careless, or maybe brave, depending on the night. You start keeping records, real records, not just your grow logs, documenting outcomes, dosages, the people who got better, and the handful who didn't. Because some part of you has started imagining the future where this data matters to someone other than you. It matters sooner than you expect, and not the way you hoped. Year 4. A man introduces himself as a regulatory consultant at a wellness expo you shouldn't have attended in person, and his questions are too specific to be casual. Batch consistency, distribution radius, whether you've had contact with any research institutions. You give him nothing, but you notice over the following weeks that a competitor's above-ground clinical trial, funded, you'll later learn, by a pharmaceutical company developing a synthetic psilocybin analog, gets fast-tracked through approval, while an independent university researcher publishing early data on natural psilocybin's superior outcomes suddenly loses her funding, and her paper quietly disappears from a preprint server. You start understanding, slowly and then all at once, You're not just outrunning local law enforcement anymore. You're standing in the way of an industry that has a direct financial interest in psilocybin staying illegal in its natural, unpatentable form long enough for a synthetic, patentable version to reach market first. You do the thing every instinct built over 4 years of careful compartmentalization tells you not to do. You reach out to the researcher whose funding disappeared. You send her your production logs, your outcome data, 4 years of dosage response records that no legitimate study has ever been allowed to collect at your scale. Because the BEA classification that keeps you a felon is the same classification that's kept anyone from running a study like it legally. She doesn't respond for 6 days. When she does, it's one line. This is the largest real-world beta set on natural psilocybin outcomes I have ever seen, and I need to know you understand what happens to both of us if this gets out the wrong way. You understand. You do it anyway, piece by piece over the following 2 months. Anonymized data first, routing through channels neither of you fully trusts, building toward a paper that will make the suppression itself part of the story, not just the drug. Somewhere in that stretch, the raid you always knew was coming finally comes. Not local police, but a joint task force that arrives at 3 of your 4 sites within the same hour, coordinated in a way small-time drug enforcement never is. You're not there when it happens. The consultant from the Wellness Expo, you'll later confirm, made a call 2 days earlier. You lose the operation in an afternoon. The equipment, the sites, 2 of the people who worked for you now face through charges of their own, which is the part that will sit heaviest with you for years, heavier than your own exposure. What you don't lose is the data, because you'd already moved it somewhere the raid couldn't reach. And 6 weeks later, the researcher's paper goes up anyway. Funding suppression documented alongside the outcome data. Your operation anonymized in the text, but unmistakable to anyone who is paying attention. It becomes the story, for about 11 days, that the news cycle can't quite decide how to hold. An underground drug operation that produced better mental health outcomes than most of the legal system around it, shut down within days of getting close to proving it in a way that couldn't be dismissed. You take a plea. Manufacturing and distribution, reduced from what it could have been because your lawyer argues, successfully, to your genuine surprise, but the timing of the raid relative to the funding story is exactly the kind of thing a jury might find interesting, and the state would rather you disappear quietly into a shorter sentence than let that argument get made in open court. You serve 14 months. You lose your lab license permanently. The coworker whose brother you helped 4 years ago writes to you the entire time, and so do a dozen other people you never met in person, people whose names you only knew as a first name on a burner phone. You get out to a state where the law hasn't changed, not yet, though it's moving, slowly, in places. Partly because of a paper that traces back to data you handed over at exactly the moment it could have destroyed you. You're not running a lab anymore. You can't. What you have instead is something you didn't expect to end up with when you were 26 and mixing substrate in a converted closet. Proof, documented and public, that the thing you built in secret worked better than the system that spent 4 years trying to bury it. You don't know yet whether that proof outlives the people who wanted it gone. You know it's out now, in a way it wasn't before, and that no raid can take back.